We're going in. That's what the president said. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And you may be wondering, with a kind of a military sounding command like that, what godforsaken hellhole is the president of the United States about to invade next? And turns out the godforsaken hellhole that we're talking about here is in the words of Abraham Lincoln, that wondrously wicked city of Chicago. Guys, we talked at some length about Donald Trump's using the National Guard to clean up Washington, D.C. And I think we all agreed that Washington, D.C. is a unique case because obviously District of Columbia, and areas under the federal jurisdiction. But we're now talking about a incorporated city in an entirely different state. So I'd really like to talk about this because on one level, it's you could argue that it's more of an overreach, but on the other side of the scale is the astonishing success that he's had in Washington. And Steve, I'd like to start with you. Like most people of conscience, I want to do the right thing. I want to do the lawful thing, and I want to do the thing that makes people happy without setting up, without lowering my guard enough so that you actually do pave way for an actual dictatorship instead of the fantasy one that the left is talking about. But the thing that makes me feel so confident that Donald Trump is right in doing this is not the political finities or niceties of the constitutional argument or the abuse of presidential power or anything. It's very simple. I have seen scores of video from regular citizens in D.C., most of them black citizens, saying that for the first time in their lives, in many cases, they feel safe. They don't feel like they have to, go through a red light for fear of carjacking. Murders went down to zero for a week. I don't know if that trend has continued. I know that I heard.
I think they made it 12 days in a row without a murder for the first time, if you trust their statistics, which are bunk. Yeah.
And the mayor of D.C., I think, came out and said carjackings are down 85%. They're not down 8.5%. They're down 85%. I think the president's decision is predicated on the interpretation that America's large cities have become lawless murder zones, and that neither the city government nor the state government is going to do anything about it, and therefore is legitimate use of the U.S. National Guard. And while I am definitely against deploying American troops in places where there is no win, I think the thing that we've seen from the example of Washington is that, no, there is a win. And as far as I'm aware, it's a bloodless win in Washington.
Yeah, what's going on in Chicago has been a huge success, or a huge success, as our president likes to say.
D.C.
Or D.C., excuse me, yes. Although Chicago, anytime I hear about crime in Chicago, I always think of SCTV's Joe Flaherty playing that communist Czechoslovakian border guard in Stripes going, Chicago, bang, bang. And that was just, the foreign view of Chicago. It's my view of Chicago. It's pretty bad there. So here's the thing. As a general rule, I'm not for calling up the National Guard to engage in ordinary law enforcement. That is a local and sometimes state responsibility. However, we do have a tradition in this country that when a locality or a state is in some sort of state of insurrection or just not enforcing the law, then the National Guard can be brought in. I seem to recall reading about an incident in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957, I believe. We're just going to go with my backup, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
In 1957, where, the schools weren't segregating. And Eisenhower, I don't think anybody thinks Eisenhower is a fascist. He's a guy who defeated the Nazis, called up the National Guard to get those kids into school where they belonged. So that said, Chicago has elected an actual communist for mayor. Chicago is a sanctuary city. And it's my view that these so-called sanctuary cities are effectively in a state of insurrection against the federal government.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
In fact, I live in a sanctuary state here in Colorado. Our governor, Pillsbury Doughboy, says, Colorado's not a sanctuary state, but he signs bill after bill doing things that sanctuary cities and sanctuary states do in terms of refusing to cooperate local and state law enforcement with the feds when it comes to enforcing immigration law. So as long as Chicago, as long as Denver, as long as Colorado is effectively in a state of insurrection against federal supremacy on immigration law, send in the guard.
Scott.
Oh wait, can I say one last thing? I'm sorry. This is important.
Of course,
I can't believe
please.
I forgot it. DC has just been kind of marveling at the improvement in these last couple of weeks. And my theory is that even if you give hardcore blue state Democrats or blue city Democrats a taste of decent law enforcement, maybe they'll start voting for better candidates.
This is exactly my thought in what happened in D.C. Scott, I'm reminded of two different firewalls I did many years ago. One of them I did for the Horowitz Freedom Center called The Most Shameful Injustice, but I wanted to call it Death by Democrats. And it was basically about all of these crime centers, where the murder rate of the U.S., if you take away these democratically controlled murder pits like St. Louis and Chicago, Detroit, and so on. You take those out of the statistics. The United States has a lower murder rate than Belgium, a lower murder rate than Switzerland. It's astonishing, really. But in that particular firewall, I looked at the length of time that these cities have been governed by a Democrat without interruption, meaning both the Democratic mayor and the Democratic city council. And it was no less than 60 years. I think in the case of Atlanta, and this was 10 years ago, it was 130 years or something like that. And so you reach a point when you realize there is not going to come a point where the Democrats that have been running these murder pits are going to suddenly start enforcing the law. Their entire political party is predicated on this kind of pandering and acceptance of this. These are 8,000 American citizens that are being murdered every year, and virtually all of them are in places like Chicago. And the President of the United States' primary duty is to protect American citizens. I completely agree that it's a little out of order for him to be doing something like this. But if you want to talk about the actual justification of it, I mean, it's pretty clear now after a century and a half that Atlanta, for example, is not about to change its ways and start enforcing the law. So who else is going to do it? Or is it better to just not do it?
I think there's a third option here. I was completely on board with what the president is doing in Washington, D.C. It is a federal city, and despite the fact that they passed a congressional act back in the early 1970s that gave a greater degree of self-governance to that city, I still think that the federal government that's the federal government's city, and they can do things that they didn't do elsewhere. I do not think that President Trump, who says I have an obligation to go into Chicago, and this isn't a political thing. I don't think it is a political thing for him. I think he genuinely cares about the violence and the crime and the murders and the carjackings and all that kind of stuff, and people living in fear, as you pointed out, largely. People who are, this is not billionaires he's protecting. This is ordinary people who live in their neighborhoods and who live in fear because of the atmosphere of crime that's been promoted. I think the third way that would be better than going over the heads of the governor or the mayor of Chicago would be to continue to be successful in Washington, D.C., and then to speak over the heads of the mayor and the governor in Illinois and say, look, this is the way D.C. was. This is the way it is. Are you willing to demand this of your elected officials? Because it can be done. And it's not because a guy wearing an American flag on his shoulder instead of the local Protect and Serve logo is doing it. It's because we got serious about dealing with these crimes of harassment, these crimes of violence that bubble up into the stats for murder. So I think he should continue to use Washington, D.C. as the exemplar and do as good a job as he can there of respecting the boundaries of what the U.S. military should do within the borders of the United States, and then hold that up as an example to the voters in these cities and say, look, you want Chicago to be safe like Washington, D.C. is becoming? Washington, D.C., while they did have a declining crime rate, according to the officials in D.C., they didn't have a low crime rate. It had just been coming down from their historic awful highs. And present this argument to them and use Washington, D.C. as the laboratory in which you can say not, hey, the military should be in your city, but your city should be as effective as the police force in D.C. has now become because of its partnership with the federal government.
The problem with the guys who have the protect and serve patch on their shoulders is not that they're incompetent law enforcement officials. It's that they've been ordered by the city government to not enforce the law. In many specific cases, they've been completely defanged, and their upper level leadership has gone to people whose priority is, trans rights and all the rest of this stuff instead of law enforcement. I like what you said about using Washington, D.C. as an example. I personally don't think that the example of an example is going to work, because the country has already had the single great control test to this experiment about whether or not Democrats and Republicans can run cities differently. And the great control test was, of course, the Big Apple, the number one city in America. New York City was the murder capital of the country prior to Rudy Giuliani taking over and Bill Braxton coming in on the police force. It was the murder capital of the country. When Republicans finally had a chance to govern the number one city in America and start enforcing the laws, New York fell out of the top 20. When I did number one with a bullet 10 years ago or something like that, looking at murder rates, it wasn't in the top 10. I don't think it was in the top 20. That is the control. That is the example. New York City didn't just do it for 2 weeks or whatever it has been with Washington. New York City did it for years. And now, after 20 years or more, 25, New York City is again reverting to Democratic policies and is becoming more and more dangerous, and the murder rate's going up. And so there you go. About a year and a half ago, in kind of in the middle of the Biden catastrophe, I was talking about doing a show called Things to Come, where I was taking a look at these 80-year cycles of human history and trying to think through where the battlefield was coming for this cycle that we're in now. And I identified the key conflict areas as being the cities, inner cities, and the border. And if you had told me that there were going to be ICE agents in the street of Los Angeles enforcing immigration laws, I would have said it's politically impossible. If you had told me my wildest dream would be to have a president who had the guts to go into the actual inner cities and eliminate the murder rate and to go right to the heart of the beast, because we have ignored this the way we've ignored a tumor that we didn't want to face. We've ignored this murder rate and this crime and this hopelessness and the despair and this rage. We've ignored it for 3 generations now. And to finally have a president who says, I am going to go in and fix this problem because nobody else will, is, to me, puts me in the same kind of situation that I feel internally when I look back on the Civil War and some of the extraordinary measures that Abraham Lincoln took, measures that I think you could probably, without question, argue were probably beyond his constitutional authority as president, but not beyond his authority as commander-in-chief of a country that was being torn to pieces by violence. I'm greatly encouraged by the fact that the excesses that Lincoln had to employ during the Civil War, that those overstepping of those boundaries disappeared as soon as the war was over, that they did not continue, that did not become part of the new normal, that once order was restored, the constitutional balance was restored. It's a thorny problem for people who think about these things. But when I come back to all of it, in the end, I come back to to the look of astonishment on the faces of people who have been lifelong Democrats in Washington, D.C. And I've seen scores of these videos. People who hate Republicans, hate Donald Trump, and so on, who are looking around and saying, my God, it's the first time I've been able to feel like I could let my kid go to school without, fear of them getting gunned down, or people going to restaurants for the first time, with their families in 20 years. Preventing evil is a really strong justification for me. And I think that on balance, it's an experiment worth conducting, because if it works, then this will either force the other mayors to start enforcing the law, or else they'll face the same treatment. And if that works, then we will be free of this cancer of murder and despair that has plagued this country for certainly since the early 1960s. The stakes are enormous, and to have a president who's got the guts to play the cards is more than I ever thought I'd live to see. And I think that the potential win is immeasurable. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Right Angle.